Good morning and welcome. Thank you for joining us today from wherever you are. The sun's shining here in Suffolk where we're based, and I hope the day has started well for you so far. I'm Andy Samways, Director of Unity Research School and one of the 40 schools making up the Research Schools network. By way of a very short introduction, Unity Schools Partnership is a multi-academy trust comprising a family of primary, secondary and special schools based in Suffolk, with schools also located in the bordering counties of Essex and Cambridgeshire, as well as East London. Our central belief is that every young life is special, open to possibility, gifted with the potential to change the world for the better. Our ambition is to unlock the potential for all children, remove the barriers to aspiration, and ensure that all children succeed. Our work as a research school contributes to the countrywide Research Schools network, a collaboration between the Education Endowment Foundation and the Institute for Effective Education to create a network of schools which support the use of evidence to improve teaching practice. Our research school activity has three strands. The first is regular communications via newsletter, blogs, and increasingly in the current context and situation, events such as this. Secondly, providing training and professional development for senior leaders and teachers on how to improve classroom practice based on the best available evidence. And finally, supporting schools to develop innovative ways of improving teaching and learning and provide them with the expertise to evaluate their impact. As a network, we seek to lead the way in the use of evidence-based teaching, building affiliations with large numbers of schools and supporting the use of evidence at scale. We really value the opportunities for collaboration this brings. This is exemplified here this morning as we're delighted to welcome Clare Flintoff, CEO of Asset Education, and Phil Palmer, Deputy CEO, two highly respected colleagues from our locality. They, along with Marc, Rowland, Disadvantaged and Vulnerable Learner Advisor here at Unity, will introduce themselves as they input. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted once again the absolute moral imperative and contextual challenges for us all in education if we're to maximise the achievement of disadvantaged learners. We know that evidence supplements experience. When experience is limited, as now, evidence can play a key role in establishing guiding principles and practice. We know that evidence provides best bets. Nothing is sure and there are no silver bullets. We know that, as the words of Dylan William, we need to be asking what works and under what conditions. In this morning's seminar, we'll be hearing from Clare on how this issue is manifesting in her context, from Marc's national experience and evidence base, and finally from Phil as he shares an example of how he and his team are leading from mitigation to success. We're recording the event and we'll host it on our Unity Research School website, and time permitting, following inputs from Clare, Marc and Phil, we'll aim to answer questions if they've been posted in the Q&A. Without further ado, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Clare Flintoff, CEO of Asset Education.
Thank you so much, Andy. It's a real pleasure to be here, and hello everyone. I'm delighted to be involved in this webinar and to have the opportunity to set the scene for the contributions from Marc and Phil. When Phil speaks a little later, you'll get the context of our trust, where we're coming from and the schools in our trust. So I won't say anything more about that, I'll let him do that. There's never been a more important time in our lifetimes to be discussing how we, as educationalists, can respond to the disadvantage and inequality that we see every day in our society and of course in our schools, which has now been made a whole lot worse by the coronavirus pandemic. This is a huge task, and now more than ever, we need to spend our time and our money wisely. And I'd like to make some observations about the challenges and potential solutions that are facing us today. I'm sure we all welcomed the announcement last Friday of a £1 billion coronavirus catch-up package for schools. Of course, on Friday, we also heard that the Year 7 catch-up premium is being discontinued, and we're still waiting for news about the PE and sports premium. Both of those funding streams are ones that schools may well have included in their budget plans for next year. But looking on the bright side and assuming that the bulk of this £1 billion really is new funding, it is extremely welcome. Spending it in an evidence-based way is important, but we must welcome the fact that government plans seem to be rooted in evidence that one-to-one and small group tuition, mentoring, tutoring boosts progress, and much of the new funding, in fact most of it, is targeted to be spent in this way. You'll know that 350 million of the 1 billion will be used to set up the National Tutoring Programme, and this has two strands. Firstly, subsidised tutoring sessions run by an approved list of organisations that schools will be able to buy into. And secondly, free coaches who will be employed by schools to work with small groups or individuals. And then 650 million will come directly to schools to use as we see fit. The Education Endowment Foundation's support guide for schools is an essential read as we decide how best to spend that money. But quite rightly, it warns us that the evidence-based base for the recommended strategies is pre-COVID, and we are living in a changed world. It's obviously right to look at what works best, what the evidence tells us is good practice and has the biggest impact. And when Phil talks to you today, you'll hear about some great practice at his school. And ideally, every school in the country will learn from schools where great things are happening. But as we make our decisions about what to do in the future, we must continue to evaluate, keep checking and monitoring as we go along, asking ourselves, is what we're doing working? And being prepared to change our minds if it's not. Life will be different from now on, and we have a duty to keep an open mind about what might work in the future. We need to find new solutions, and we need to learn from this experience. The scale of the challenge ahead is immense. We probably need to be more honest about what we can expect to solve. Education is only part of the answer to achieving social equality and equity for every young person. While we've had some successes over the last few years, the attainment gap between the rich and the poor at 16 is not closing despite all of our efforts. Sometimes it might feel as if we're fighting a losing battle against the impacts of poverty. There are now 4.2 million children living in poverty, 600,000 more than in 2012. Before coronavirus, the Social Mobility Commission were projecting that this number will increase to 5.2 million by 2022. This is now going to be far worse. Our country is facing an uncertain future and potentially a recession bigger than we've seen in our lifetimes. The reality is that we will certainly have more children from poor, low-income backgrounds in our classrooms. Now, 50 years ago, my family moved to Ipswich. It was my third school move into a junior class at a central Ipswich primary school. Along with my two siblings, I received free school meals. Not for 1 second would I claim that we had a disadvantaged childhood. As a family with a low income, there were things that we couldn't afford to do, places that were too expensive to visit. Not surprisingly, having experienced this as a child, one of the most important things that I think a school can do for its poorer families is to take children to places that their parents can't afford to take them, places that their parents might not prioritise. Museums, art galleries, the theatre, the cinema, the seaside, the countryside, other places outside of their own experience. Using some of our funding to narrow gaps in experience like this is so important. If we're going to organise longer trips away, residentials to other parts of the country, or even abroad, why would we consider doing this if it's not for the benefit of our disadvantaged, poorer children who would otherwise never have experiences like that? Don't leave them behind. My family's experience taught me not to label or to make assumptions about people's backgrounds, their income and their experience. Getting to know our families without making assumptions is key. In fact, better to assume that all children are disadvantaged rather than to have decided who is and who isn't when that decision is not based on detailed and thorough evidence and getting it wrong. Better to plan our whole curriculum from September based on meeting the needs of our less fortunate pupils. It's useful for policymakers and decision makers to know the numbers of children on free school meals in the system so that they can make decisions about allocations of funding and direct funding where numbers are higher. It's a useful measure. A school with more pupil premium funded children will receive more money, and rightly so. But in schools and at school level, we need to take that allocation of funding and use it in a much smarter way. We need to target it where it will have the most success in improving life chances of the children who are struggling the most. And that means that we need to know and take time to get to know our children and their families. One of the surprising findings of some work that we've done in our trust through the lockdown period is that teachers have told us that relationships with families are better, and there is more contact rather than less, and more discussion about learning than ever. Let's hope that that's something that we can build on in the future. Relationships are key to all of this. Every family is different. Each member of the family is unique. We must never make assumptions about the challenges that they face without talking to them and taking time to find out. We need our teaching staff to do this. So I would argue that we need to build in time for them to contact parents and interact with them, and we may need to direct our funding accordingly. Also, let's not assume that all of our young people will come back disadvantaged by this lockdown experience. In our latest pupil survey, we had just over 1,000 pupils who responded, and they told us that they'd enjoyed much of the lockdown experience. They enjoyed spending more time with their family. They liked the flexibility of being able to work at home at their own pace, in a comfortable space, in comfortable clothes. Some said that they liked the quiet when they worked. Many of them have enjoyed a wider variety of activities, particularly baking, sports, arts and crafts, and gardening. You know, we've all learnt from this experience, haven't we? Our children are just the same. They've learned all sorts of things, just not necessarily everything that we had planned. Most of our children will be fine, and they will catch up with the learning they've missed. Again, we need to build in time in every lesson to notice their gaps in learning and respond to them straight away. It's part and parcel of what we do as teachers, and we may need to prioritise and reduce some of what we cover to give us time to do that. We also need to be spotting those who've not been okay, and we need to work out how we're going to do that and whether our on-return assessment will provide the information that we need. This crisis is an opportunity to reset. I would suggest that we need to take a longer term view and consider what we can do now that will be in the best long-term interests of our young people. We do know that more disadvantaged pupils are staying in education for longer. More are going on to higher education, more are in work at the moment. But the evidence suggests that many of those in work are stuck in low-paid jobs. Perhaps now is the time to ask ourselves why that's the case. What are we doing in schools now to make sure that not only do those children pass their exams, but they also have the skills to be successful human beings, and they can make valuable contributions, that they have the confidence and the self-esteem they need to feel happy and healthy, and that they can express their ideas, their feelings and their opinions, and do all the things that help people to be successful at work and in life. What are we doing now to ensure that? How are we going to direct our funding towards longer term outcomes? Are we brave enough to do that? And are we prioritising what we value? This crisis is forcing us to have conversations that are long overdue, and that's a really good thing. In resetting, I suggest that we think more radically and creatively. For example, I'm not at all certain that our current Year 5s, who will return to school in September for their final year in primary school, really need 8 months of cramming for SATs, because that's what it will be like in some schools. Is that putting their long-term personal, social and academic development first? Will it really prepare them for high school the following year? What should we be doing instead? Our young people need all the help that they can get in preparing them for the future and developing the creativity, the thinking and the skills that they will need in order to overcome future pandemics, to overcome racism, to find solutions to global warming and to build a more compassionate and sustainable world. The challenge is so enormous that perhaps this time people will get behind it. Our job is to seize this opportunity, seize the moment, for their sake, and to do the right thing today. I'm going to hand over to Marc next.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you so much. Just you're finishing there. My next door neighbour's decided to mow his lawn, so if you get some additional sound, that's what it is. So forgive me. I thank you so much, Claire. You know, and having spent certainly the last 10 years, you know, relentlessly looking at what is going on in schools that you know, well, are really getting to grips with this issue around tackling educational disadvantage. I've heard no better exemplification than that there. So thank you very, very much. And I know Phil will go into more detail about that shortly. I think you know, the points around a long-term view are really, really important, and we can negate the worst effects of this if we focus on learning. If we focus on learning, that's where we can make a difference. And I think your point around year 6 next year is very, very well made. I really, really think we need to, as an education system, work together. Yeah. So the question is not from external accountability, not about why haven't you improved outcomes for disadvantaged pupils? It is how do we work together to improve outcomes for disadvantaged pupils? And as schools, we need to focus on what's in our gift, what we can influence, and not try and solve all of society's problems, because we really, really can't. The limited opening of schools is, you know, on average, has disproportionately impacted on our most disadvantaged pupils, not least because I think about pressure on families, particularly those on low incomes or insecure incomes, around what we're able to prioritize, but also around structure, routine, social interaction, relationships. I think those are all key. And those, of course, are in addition to some of the challenges that we are facing in our school system already. One of the concerns I have is that the provision of ICT equipment, or indeed tuition services, become the primary goal rather than a lack of focus on learning in the long term. And I do think that's a risk that we have. The key issues I think I've written about extensively are around literacy, particularly around sort of oral language. Children's oral language is a real limiting thing on future attainment. Self-regulation skills, motivation, relationships, self-confidence, self-esteem. That's where our focus needs to be. Claire mentioned as well, I think beautifully put, around how our disadvantaged pupils all too often have assumptions made about them. Not all of our disadvantaged pupils will be having a really tough time during lockdown. They really won't, and there'll be lots of supportive families doing their very, very best. Similarly, families from some of the most fortunate backgrounds also may be having a very difficult time, depending on that family's experiences. So, and that will be different for different age groups, different phases. So we need to be thinking about this sort of differently. And in particular, I think, and rooting our practices in assessment, formal and informal, academic and pastoral, rather than in particular labels or particular groups of pupils. And in particular, I think we need to think about children's perceptions of themselves as learners, because that may well have been impacted on during lockdown. As ever, looking ahead, I think we need to do a few things well. The more that we try to do, the less chance those things have got of being implemented well, and we'll end up with initiative fatigue, and cynicism within our teaching and learning staff. A collective understanding of what we're trying to achieve, and individuals within school understanding what their roles are within that approach is really, really important. So that, looking ahead, we all own the pupil premium strategy in our school. We all own our approaches to tackling educational disadvantage. It isn't the role of one person. It's something that everybody takes responsibility for, and a collective ownership. So teacher agency is really important here, that teachers understand why they're doing things rather than being told to do things that are superficially about accountability. I what else? I mean, I think this point around a sort of long-term approach is really, really important, and I think we've made a lot of gains on that in the last few years. Work with the Department for Education, acknowledging that we need to take a 3-year approach to our pupil premium strategies rather than a 1-year one. And I think, again, some of the pressure and language in the system makes me a little bit anxious that we might lose those, sort of those well fought for sort of gains. We tackle educational disadvantage by focusing on pupil need, driven by assessment, not on labels, and it should be about early intervention, in particular making sure that as many as possible of our disadvantaged pupils are accessing high quality early years provision, rather than, as Claire mentioned, chucking the kitchen sink at year 6 to pull children up to meet accountability targets, because I'd argue that isn't learning, and it isn't going to set those pupils up for their life chances and life choices ahead. And that's where we can start off with this sort of, a collective approach. I worry about school being seen to be optional now, and I think that's a real challenge. Anecdotal research telling us that, perhaps in many cases, our families from the very least fortunate backgrounds are less likely to be attending lessons as schools are opening up, but also around attending lessons online. And I know there's a range of complex factors around that, around gaps in learning, issues with resources, space, motivation, literacy, background knowledge, self-confidence, self-regulation skills. The amount I've said, put your phone away to my children more than anything else over the last sort of few months. But we need to, I think, reassert the value and the importance of education and learning every day around structure and routine. And I think there needs to be a minimum expectation around that as an education system. In terms of our school culture ahead, we really, really need to, and I'm building on some really interesting recent work with colleagues around the country on this, around some principles that we need to be adopting. That we need to be adopting a relational approach with our pupils and families. We need to connect with our pupils and families on an individual basis, as Claire said, understanding their context. Our academic staff need to work really closely with pastoral teams to make sure that there isn't this sort of separation of strategies around sort of pastoral need and academic need. We tackle both those things together. I'd argue again and again, based on work with John Tomset at Huntingdon School in York, that the best way to raise a pupil's self-esteem and self-confidence is for them to be successful in their lessons in the classroom. And that's about scaffolding up for those pupils rather than differentiating down, about relationships and pastoral teams working closely with academic staff. Of course, the foundation of any effective pupil premium strategy is rooted in strong pastoral care and a sense of belonging in our schools. Disadvantaged pupils should not be treated as a homogenous group. Some colleagues in East Sussex have been talking about priority pupils rather than specific labels, and I think that's a nice way of thinking about it. But we need to be proactive, anticipating those future challenges and making sure that we take that long-term approach, which means that underachievement of disadvantaged pupils is not inevitable. And we can only do that by an early intervention approach. As Andy talked about a little bit earlier, research evidence should inform our decision-making rather than lead it. It should inform it, and in some cases it should challenge our decision making as well. So we should be using it to challenge our views, not just to justify it. And again, as Claire said, the importance of impact evaluation, robust impact evaluation, particularly when, and I thought Claire put this beautifully, that if the evidence base for the issues that we're facing is relatively new, the chances are the evidence base for those approaches is going to be limited. And the weaker the evidence base for anything, the more robustly we need to be evaluating what we're doing. And I think because we can't lose any more time, can we? Particularly with pupils being out of the classroom. And I don't know if anybody saw the EEF's evaluation of achievement for all around, when pupils are taken away from their learning, and where teacher agency is not there, how we see some weaker outcomes for disadvantaged pupils. And I'd say again and again, I think there's a false dichotomy around social and emotional well-being and academic achievement. I think they go hand in hand. Achievement leads to motivation, it leads to really feeling more secure, it leads to feeling a sense of intrinsic motivation and that belonging as well. And I can't say enough, I think, keep it simple. I hope I'm echoing what you're saying, Claire. I really think we need to keep it simple, cut out, we'll end up with, if we don't keep it simple, and if we don't, be quite robust in leaving some things that we'd like to do behind, we're going to end up in an educational Sargasso Sea. We really are in a complete tangle, trying to do everything and doing it superficially and getting bogged down. Quality first teaching is at the heart of an effective approach here, with teachers and other classroom-based staff having a shared understanding of what we mean by inclusive quality first teaching subjects to their specific to their subject and phase. I really commend to you the work around of Margaret Mulholland, who's now at Askell, around inclusive pedagogy. And this course does mean something different, in different subjects and different phases. But about pupils, I saw this working now with colleagues in the Kent Catholic Schools Partnership recently. And these are non-selective schools within a selective local authority. And that wonderful thing around inclusive teaching, where all pupils' contributions to those lessons are valued, even if there are misconceptions in there around encouraging those pupils from less fortunate backgrounds to talk and share their views. Because if they talk, you can hear those misconceptions and you can address them as a teacher. Really powerful for me. Pupil premium moments where those pupils' contributions and efforts to join into learning are treasured, because actually those are the moments that I think again create that sense of belonging in school. Every interaction between teacher and pupil is an intervention. Teachers are the most effective interventions around this, and again some challenges ahead around assessment, I think, but I'd argue the most effective thing that we can do for our disadvantaged and vulnerable pupils is to give them the literacy skills, the background knowledge, the self-regulation skill to enable them to be independent learners. And the most effective thing we can do within our pupil premium strategies is to give our teaching and learning staff the capacity, the expertise, the professional development, the knowledge to be able to meet the needs of their pupils. We need to relentlessly focus on what happens in the classroom. Sean Allison from Durrington Research School has captured a brilliant blog called Teaching Moments around those little things that teachers do to make a difference for their disadvantaged pupils. We need to be focusing on literacy, self-regulation skills, relationships, planning for participation, background knowledge, those little moments around social interactions that make all the difference for those pupils. Though if we don't focus there, any tuition, those types of things, will be on weaker foundations. And I think an approach around tuition, needs to be directly linked to what's happening in the classroom day in, day out. That whole school approach is really powerful, and I think it's exemplified by colleague Neil Sirrett at Cook Spinney School over in Harlow around language development. Neil talks about from reception through to year 6, every moment in school being a language moment. Every teacher understands what that strategy is about and looks, it's not about tackling the language back through intervention, it's about every moment being a language moment in the school. Admin staff, reception staff, lunchtime staff focus on language development too. So it sort of is laying siege on the issue across the school. And I also want to reference around attendance, which I think is going to be a challenge for us in the short term and medium term too, around disadvantage. Because of that lack of structure and routine. The British Psychological Society have produced a brilliant report on tackling attendance issues, and I really commend that to you, around an evidence-based approach to the attendance gap. Stephen Tierney at Blackpool Research School has exemplified that research by saying you can mandate issues around attendance so far, but ultimately this is about pupils' experiences in lessons and they're feeling like they belong there, that will really, really, really make the difference. So, so I think I think that's where we need to focus our energies. We need to lose that label, assessment to be driving practice, not accountability. Yeah, and put our accountability to pupils and families first, rather than our SATs scores, as Claire mentioned. And we're not powerless over these things. I've talked about Margaret Mulholland and inclusive pedagogy. I thoroughly recommend to you looking at Greenshaw High School's approach to whole school literacy. Really, really, impressive. Our colleagues at Laureate Primary Academy in Newmarket around making sure that every moment in school is a learning moment, particularly around upskilling the practice of our teaching assistants, moving away from class, sort of task completion and focusing on learning. So these are about cultural change. My colleagues down in St Ives School down in Cornwall have taken a 3-year approach to tackling disadvantage, where everything from ITT, NQT training, middle leadership training, senior leadership training, school development plans, has a really sharp focus on disadvantage in that community. Disadvantage runs through the strategy like St Ives through a stick of rock at that school. So I'd really commend to you what they are doing there. I'm going to wrap up here now because I really want to, much better hear the practical exemplifications that Phil are going to give you. But I want to just mention a couple of final things really around workforce well-being and staff well-being. I think this often drops off the off the map really in terms of schools disadvantaged and pupil premium strategies, but well-being is going to be absolutely critical, that we look after our staff. We need them to be able to come into school, not feel overburdened, multiple strategies, those kinds of things, because actually that sort of consistency of relationships with pupils, the expertise they have, the knowledge they have of their pupils, that sort of emotional connection is going to be absolutely critical. It might not be an easily defined intervention that we can use, but I think it's of fundamental importance to recovery and sustaining better outcomes for disadvantaged pupils. And last thing I want to say, Claire, I couldn't agree more about parents. I think we've got a great opportunity to build on what generally I think is a much stronger relationship between all of our families and school as a result of the awful circumstances that we found ourselves in. Let's make sure those families continue to feel a sense of belonging with school. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to wonderful Phil now.
Thank you very much, Marc, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. Hello, everybody. I'm delighted to be here today. My name is Phil Palmer. I'm co-head teacher at the Oaks Primary School in Ipswich, as well as a bit of a mouthful of a job title with Asset Education. I'm Director of School Improvement and also Deputy CEO of the Trust. For those of you who don't know Asset, you can see on the screen there, we're made up of 14 schools across Suffolk. We started with 3 schools right in the middle of Ipswich over time. The Oaks, my school, was one of the founder members of the Trust. That's grown over time. We've had 5 schools in the northeast of the county join us, and then some more schools in and around the Ipswich area who've made us the happy little band of schools that we are today. So I just wanted to share, can I go to the next slide, please, Joe? Thank you. I just wanted to share our values, because the values that we have are really, really important. They have been a really valuable guide in helping us with some really tricky decision making during this period of time. And I think that's what great values do. And 2 particularly that I'll talk about through this talk that I'm doing, excellence and equity, have really just underpinned everything that we do at the Oaks, as well as the Trust, over a period of time. And I would also suggest that if the values that you have within your school, within your trust, haven't been guiding you at the moment, then it might be time to have a little refresh before next academic year, because they're crucial. If you're not sure about equity, the difference between equity and equality is depicted there in the bottom corner. Equality is everybody having the same thing, and so in this example, you've got 3 people of differing ages and heights wanting to watch a game. They've all got a crate and the little one can't see. But in an equitable world and an equitable society, we do what we can for everybody to give everybody a good outcome. So the Oaks, next slide please, Joe. The Oaks is situated on the Chantry estate in Ipswich. If you know Chantry, if you know Ipswich, you will know that it's an area of relatively high social deprivation. The estate was built in the 50s and there were 2 schools built to serve the estate at that time, Chantry Infant School and Chantry Junior School. By my understanding of the past, the junior school was always thought of quite positively. Sorry, the infant school was thought of quite positively, the junior school less so. And after a period of time in special measures in 2005, the junior school was shut by the local authority. The 2 schools were amalgamated to make a right-through primary school, take the stigma of Chantry out of the name and name it after the oak trees at the front of the school. And a new school was begun. That was 2005. I joined the school in 2007 to find what I guess you would expect from a school, and particularly a junior school, that had been suffering from very, very low standards for quite a long time, bottom of the league tables and so on. There were low standards in the school. We had an Ofsted in 2009 where we escaped a category by the skin of our teeth. I think that's fair to say. And I'm really proud that over time, through sort of determined and gradual improvement, we were able to secure an outstanding judgment from Ofsted in our 2018 inspection. Our disadvantaged pupils tend to perform better than the national average for non-disadvantaged pupils. And there's some more context you can see about the school there. We're completely full, not very predominantly white British, but that is changing over time. And I will come back to talk a little bit more about that journey towards outstanding in a moment or two. But before I do, can I go to the next slide, please, Joe? I just wanted to quickly touch on something that came out a few weeks ago, because the EEF report that sort of came out into the impact of remote learning. It came out on if I recall correctly, on a Wednesday morning, and about an hour before I was going to go into a head teachers meeting with the head teachers in our trust. And it was certainly around the time that there was a lot of negativity around in the press, a lot of negativity towards teachers, schools opening, backlash against the unions, that kind of thing. And everything felt just basically a little bit rubbish. And so when this report landed and I saw that first bullet point, I thought, gosh, it's going to reverse the progress to close the gap that we've made in the last decade. And I thought, really, is that all been wiped out in 10 weeks? I'm skipping the second point to go to the third one. Sustained support will be needed to help disadvantaged pupils catch up. And then I thought, well, yes, but I think we know that. And then I read the middle one, and that supporting effective remote learning will mitigate the extent to which the gap widens. So the way that was presented, I thought, was pretty damning from the first bullet point, but there's so much in there that's great. And I just lifted that sentence there that you can read in italics, because we can do so much. We can still make a lot of difference. There are 4 weeks left of this term. Let's make the most of those that time that we've got. Clear explanation, scaffolding, feedback. I'm going to say those things a lot today. Clear explanation, scaffolding, feedback. At the Oaks and across the schools in our trust, we've been working hard to adapt and improve our remote learning offer. We think our remote learning offer is great. It's extensive. We're pretty much giving children a full timetable every day. We've developed over the time that we've been on lockdown. We've started to record videos. We've started to do some live teaching. We're meeting with our children online, trying to look after their well-being and so on. But it comes back to those things: clear explanations, scaffolding, feedback. I also wanted to draw people's attention, if you haven't seen it, to some research from John Hattie that came out at the end of April, before the EEF stuff, synthesizing research from other periods of time where school systems haven't been able to be in session. And I think his research painted a more heartening picture that actually we mustn't panic. We can still make progress. We can still give our children as good a time as we can. And it's not the time in class that matters, but it's what we do in the time that we've got that's the most important thing. So if we could go to the next slide, please. I'm just going to talk a little bit more now about my direct experiences as co-head teacher at the Oaks. And the first thing to say is, really, as Claire said in her talk at the beginning, we treat everybody here as disadvantaged. Now, that might be easier here for some schools than others. We don't have affluent families in our school. There's very, very little difference between the children who trigger pupil premium funding and the children who don't trigger pupil premium funding. Chantry is exactly as you'd expect from what many believe was the largest council estate in Britain at the time that it was built. But the things we've done over time at the Oaks to raise the achievement of disadvantaged pupils are very applicable now to this current situation. And firstly, what we absolutely don't do is just ascribe difficulties to family backgrounds. We like to stop and think about the children, develop relationships with the parents and the families, and then really think about the barriers they're facing. But we think about what are those barriers in school as well as at home. I have children. My youngest son is in reception. He returned to school last week, and he was a bit perturbed because he was being taught in a key worker class in the school hall. It's not his normal classroom. He likes routine, and everything was a little bit different. So there was a lot for him to process. When he came home, he said that he hadn't really wanted to go to the toilet because the toilet belongs to the man with the broken arm sitting on his chair. After the initial sort of puzzlement of what he meant, we realised that the man with the broken arm sitting on his chair was Tom's understanding of what we would know as the disabled syndrome. So we never quite know how children see the world, but the more we can talk to them, the more we can understand how they see things and the barriers that they might be facing, and that they might be in school as well as out of school. I also think any previous labels about disadvantage and who triggers that money is particularly unhelpful now. People have got different circumstances. There are some families, parents might not be working, traditional, perhaps pupil premium families, and they might be used to being at home with the children. They might have supported them with their learning fantastically well. At the other end of the spectrum, there are people professional families who may have found it very, very difficult to find the time to support their children in learning, who might have been left a little bit more to their own devices. My middle child certainly has developed his fortnight skills over this time on lockdown. And there are millions and millions of other circumstances between those two ends of the spectrum. I think that's where it's really important that we're treating everybody as disadvantaged now, because other people haven't lived through this in the same way that we're living through this now. And so at the Oaks, once we've done all those things, we've thought about the barriers, and we've thought carefully about those, and we think about, right, what are we going to do about these things? And we do things that a lot of schools do, but we do them with bells on. So we really, really go all out at providing cultural experiences that we know that the children won't get as part of their own family lives. Claire touched on that at the beginning. We'll continue to do as much of that as we can. Our children do come in with very low language skills and language understanding, comprehension, speech. And so we spend a lot of money on early speech and language intervention in reception and early years. Now, this is what we do now. We're in 2020 now, and we think we've got a better understanding of what we're trying to do. In the beginning, when we first started getting people premium cash, that wasn't how we did it. We made mistakes. We did what Marc described and probably threw everything at year 6 at the expense of everything else. By doing that, we never really made progress. We stuck classes over a lot of cracks. We were gradually improving, but it wasn't really making a difference. And Professor John West Burnham, who we're lucky enough to have as the chair of our trust, a story that he's told that has always stuck with me, which is attributed to someone called Saul Alinsky, who was a political activist in America in the 30s. He tells a story of adults, a group of walkers camping by a riverside one night. And then all of a sudden they see a baby floating down the river, and they panic and they jump. There's lots of kerfuffle, and they jump into the water and they get the baby and they bring it back to the side. And then they think, gosh, how would this happen? And then all of a sudden there's another baby, and they save that one, and then there's another baby, and so on and so on. And they spend their evening trying to rescue these babies from the river. And then one of their number gets up and says, I've had enough of this, I'm going. And the others shout at him and say, what are you doing? How can you go? We need to save these babies. And so he says, I'm going upstream. I'm going to find out who's throwing the babies in the river in the first place, and I'm going to stop them doing it. And that's what we did at the Oaks. We went upstream. We changed our approach. There were too many babies in the river at the Oaks, and our quality first teaching wasn't good enough. Can I have the next slide, please, Joe? Now, I hate phrases. I hate quality first teaching as a phrase. I don't really think that quality, just putting the word quality in front of anything, means anything. I think it needs another word before quality to make you understand whether it's high quality or low quality. So what I want to talk about is high quality, evidence-based, inclusive teaching. I think that's a much more useful phrase than quality first teaching. What that looked like at the Oaks was us sitting down as a whole staff and deciding what we wanted to see. We discussed that, we made lists of things we wanted to see, we talked about what that would look like in the classroom, and then we went all out for it. It was a huge investment in time, it was a huge investment in both monitoring and support, a huge investment in release time to build leadership capacity to support teachers in the classroom, but we did make time for it. We made the improvement of teaching and learning our first priority. And now a few years later, our interventions submit the excellence that we see in the classroom, supplement it rather than act as a sticking plaster for what we haven't done quite well enough. And we use that intervention to pre-teach rather than firefight and pick up what we've missed. Most importantly, that inclusive bit, we want all our pupils to succeed in challenging learning in the classroom. And intervention doesn't solve the problems of poor quality inclusive practice. And I'm always a little bit worried about when there's a really huge intervention diet that a teacher might notice a child who's not quite learning in the classroom in a lesson and then thinks, well, it's okay, they're in intervention this afternoon, they'll be all right. I think that's a really dangerous thing that we can avoid. Here at the school, every staff meeting that we have concentrates on pedagogy. We dedicate time to it. We talk to our children. We think carefully about their barriers and circumstances, but what nobody will do here is ever allow those barriers to be an excuse for underachievement. And so it's on the next slide, and it picks up directly from what Marc was saying about culture. This is the thing that I really get passionate about. It's school culture. And it's difficult to define culture, I think, but I hit upon a phrase, well, somebody told it to me, but I can't remember who it was who told me, so I can't unfortunately give them the credit. But culture it's what people do in your school when you're not looking. And I think that's a great way to describe it. Here at the Oaks, it's about returning to those core values. Culture here is about resilience, excellence, equity. We care for each other, we look after each other, we hold doors for each other, children and adults. We all say our pleases and thank yous. We don't talk over each other. And we take collective responsibility and have collective determination to improve things, and that counts for our teaching and learning as well. Our quality first teaching, to use that phrase, is just part and parcel. The improvement of that quality first teaching is part and parcel of our school culture. The progress, the attainment, the welfare, the education, the happiness of all of our children is everybody's responsibility. And what we've done over time, and the only way I think we've really got that, is by talking about it a lot. We do have a pupil premium lead, and she works very hard at making sure that everybody understands it's not her responsibility. And little emails dropping in, just reminding people of the agenda all the time. Keep bringing it back, keep talking about it. We think that's what makes the difference. Along with relationships. The relationships that adults have with children in school is absolute paramount importance. If you haven't seen it, I recommend that you Google "Every Child Needs a Champion." It's a TED talk by someone called Rita Pearson, and it sums it up quite well. We've also had more contact with our families recently, as Claire says, and that's helped our understanding of our children and what we can do to build our relationships with them and support them. But there's a blog I read recently by somebody called Ben Pollard, and I'm just going to read this bit to you now because I think it captures what relationships mean to children better than I can say it at the moment. So this is what he said. We've all been there. Sorry, I should say it's an example from a high school. It's halfway through break time and you're just about to head to the other side of the school to set up for your rather excitable Year 10 class. At which point, the little Year 7 lad from your tutor group walks in, his world about to end because he thought he'd left his PE kit in your room, only to find that he now has no idea where it is. Gallantly, you drop everything and first embark on this wild goose chase with him, leaving your chances of making it to period 3 on time hanging by a thread. Regardless, you set off at a pace which is not quite running, but a type of speed walk that's reserved only for teachers such as yourself and competitors in one of those slightly bizarre walking races at the Olympics. As we all know, however, this is far from the end of your intrepid journey. On the way, you see the Year 11 girl who's usually challenging in your lesson but was brilliant yesterday, and you mention it again. You then remind 2 Year 8s that you're looking forward to their next piece of homework being as good as it was last week. Add to that the comforting of the Year 10 girl who's fallen out with her friends, helping the lost Year 7 to their next lesson, and copying some flack from the group of Year 9 boys whose team beat yours 4-0 last night, and you start to wonder if you'll ever actually make it to period 3. You do, of course, eventually arrive for your lesson, chastising yourself for being late and unprepared because Year 10 deserve better, and almost certainly having forgotten about those inconvenient encounters on the way already. What we should remember, however, is that those encounters will have been anything but inconvenient for the students, will absolutely not have been forgotten. In fact, for some of those students, it will have been the single most positive contact that they will have with an adult that day. And I argue that if you've got the culture right, you've done the hardest bit before you even think about which intervention that you need to choose. And at the Oaks, quality first teaching, high quality inclusive practice, and collective determination to improve is just part of a wider culture, the culture of excellence. So what do we do next? Next slide, please, Joe. There's been lots written about the need for a recovery curriculum. I listened to Mary Mayat talk last week, and her view was that actually it's a recovery conversation that we need to, and we shouldn't be forcing it. We don't know what's going to come out. We don't know what our children are going to say. We don't know when they're going to say it. We don't know how long it's going to take to come out, and we shouldn't be forcing it or making a big narrative of dreadfulness about this period of time. Obviously, some people have had really dreadful times, but there are also many children who've had a great time. I think we need to be available to our pupils. I think we need to acknowledge that this has been an important event in children's lives, in all our lives, but we need to make sure it doesn't define them, define our children. We will need to do exactly what Marc said. We need high quality assessment, both of academic work, but also I think of the whole child. We're going to need to make smart choices about what we do teach. We need to slow down. We need to make more time, and consequently, we'll need to leave some bits out. Claire mentioned the pupil survey that we did within our trust at a week or so ago. The things pupils missed were missing their friends, missing their teachers, having proper interactions, playtimes, learning with others though as well, learning with others and doing group activities. The things they liked, they really liked the comments they've been receiving from teachers on their remote learning. We can still make a difference. The top thing they didn't like, that they need help from their grown-up at home because they want to succeed at challenging learning themselves. Go back to what I said before, right at the start. Clear explanation, scaffolding and feedback. They're the things that we need to make time for. We need to think about some really difficult choices. Do we want next year's year 6, for instance? Do we want them to pass their SATs? Is that the diet we want to give them, or do we want to give them what we think they need for the next stages of their life? What are we going to choose? At the Oaks, we'll keep doing the things that we think are really important. We'll try and get our children to be really great readers and talkers. We'll try to help them understand each other as learners. Lots of work on self-regulation and metacognition. But catch up and recovery is only going to work if we're teaching them really, really well in the first place. And so just the things I'd like to finish off by saying, as was said earlier, there's no magic solution to any of this stuff. We need collective responsibility and determination. We need to be there for our children and have unconditional positive regard for them, no matter how challenging that sometimes is. We need high quality, evidence-based, inclusive teaching, and let's not let this period of lockdown define them. Let's be hopeful for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Claire. We aimed to try to bring together and exemplify some of what is hopefully helping define what we're doing at the moment. And I, for one, was scribbling down copious pieces there. What we'll do in answer to some of the questions, we'll make sure that we put on, we send you an email, all delegates, with references that we've quoted here. We'll do that for you, absolutely. We've recorded this so you can come back to it again. We'll let you know when it's live on our Unity Research School website, because I'm sure, like me, you want to pick over some of the really salient points that we're taking. For me, that sense from Claire, I was taking the sense of the real challenge that we can take with this, but also the opportunity to reset. From Mark, the sense of doing a few things well and keeping it simple, and realizing that piece around that achievement leads to motivation. So securing opportunities for children to succeed. And from Phil, you know, seeking to understand perception before we seek to do anything else, and going upstream. Just a couple of things from each person, I think, in that way. If we can just round off, we're right on the wire. But I just wondered if you're prepared to share, if there's one really positive legacy from this situation, what would that be that's guiding you this week and next week? Claire, whether you're able to come in with that?
Sorry, I need to unmute first before I start talking. I think what you said then was the opportunity, and I think Phil summed it up in terms of hope. You know, actually there is an opportunity to think really differently now, and what a shame if we go back to doing the same old stuff in the same old way. So let's take this opportunity to reset and do some things very, very differently.
Thank you, Claire. Phil, from you?
I think for me it's about slowing down and doing more of the more important things. I think so much of what we've done has been almost like a mad 100-mile-an-hour dash towards something, and we haven't really had time to stop and think about whether some of those things we're doing are absolutely the right things to be doing. So yeah, let's slow down and make more of the important things.
Thank you. Mark?
I've got nothing to add to those two things.
No.
I could waffle on for a couple of minutes, but I don't need to, Andy.
You don't. Well, I just thought I'd give you the opportunity just in case. Well, I think what we'll do, we'll round it to a close. We've got, for me, this has been the first time that we've brought this kind of seminar together. So thank you very much for taking part as participants. I'm always drawn back to the ethical leadership framework. And today we've just heard absolute service, we've heard optimism, we've heard courage, and we've heard kindness. And at a time like this, kindness, looking after each other is a crucial piece. So thank you for joining us. Can I please thank Claire, Phil, Marc, and also Joe Francis, who's the control centre behind all this. So thank you. We wish you well. We'll share with you all the resources and links, but have a great day and all the very best in all your endeavours. Thank you and goodbye.